We are here to talk to you today about how to eat to save the planet. For those of you that aren't familiar with Eco-Caledon, we're a small, I want to say small but mighty environmental group championing climate action here in the town of Caledon. And I just want to do, if I can, a quick intro. So I probably should have started by introducing myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lou. I'm one of the co-chairs for Eco-Caledon. We've got our other co-chair, John McRae, sitting at the desk over there. And in the back, if those lovely ladies wouldn't mind waving, we've got Betty, Carolyn, Sylvana, Val, and we do have an extra volunteer today. So we can start with a little bit of a land acknowledgement. So the Toronto region is in the Dish with One Spoon territory, and the Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into the treaty in the spirit of peace and friendship. A little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about our relationship with nature. We're going to be talking a little bit about what's on our plate at home, how our food choices impact the climate crisis, and then how we can make better choices that actually have more of a positive impact on the climate. So this haiku pretty much says it all. We don't have to get too much into the deal with climate change. I think we're all very familiar. It's warming, it's bad, it's definitely us, we're sure, but we can fix it.
There's something I would like to talk about. Our relationship with nature is broken, but relationships can change. The climate crisis, ecological crisis, and health crisis, they are all interlinked. We no longer see the links between them. We only see this far. So what will we do? My name is Greta Thunberg, and I would like to connect the dots. Because let's face it, if we don't change, we are f***ed. Millions have died from COVID-19. Zika, Ebola, West Nile fever, SARS, MERS. Up to 75% of all new diseases come from other animals. Because of the way we farm and treat nature, cutting down forests and destroying habitats, we are creating the perfect conditions for diseases to spill over from one animal to another and to us. The next pandemic could be much, much worse. But we can change. It is heartbreaking to know all this, but it is also our opportunity. We know what we can do. We can change the way we farm. We can change what we eat. We can change how we treat nature. Some of us have lots of choices, while some have none at all. Those with the most power have the most responsibility. And most of us can do something. So, what will you do?
Awesome. So a very simple but powerful message from Greta. We can change how we farm, we can change what we eat, and we can change how we treat nature. So there's definitely an opportunity here. Does what we eat have an impact on global warming? Well, yeah. Actually, the world's food system is responsible for about 1/4 of the planet-warming greenhouse gases that humans generate each year. And that's pretty much on par with electricity production as well, right? So a lot of times when we think of the consequences of climate change, we usually think about our energy choices. So the idea is if we eat, we are part of this system. So everything that we do, and eating obviously is something that we all do, we are part of this system that's causing the impact on the planet. So from farm to fork, the things that we choose to eat obviously have a major impact on the planet. So let's think about what's on our plate, maybe what the last big meal that we ate was. A lot of times we go to the grocery store, we buy our groceries, not thinking too much about where that food came from, who helped to grow it, how it was processed, packaged, sent to us, and then how did we either use it or dispose of it. So something that you can do is you can ask yourself some questions while you're doing your either meal plans or you're preparing a meal. One, how far did my food travel to get to me? Obviously, we know that here in Ontario, a lot of our a lot of things like fruits are imported, and so where are they coming from exactly? Because that has a huge impact on the environment. Number two, who grew or helped produce my food? So how people are treated in other countries too is something you can think about when you're making your food choices. Three, what was my food packaged in? So now I'm sure a lot of you, when you go to the grocery store, you'll notice a majority of your foods are all packaged in plastic, right? So making the choice, it's hard, I can be honest, it's hard to find things that are unpackaged, but doing the best that we can to find those items or shopping at stores and markets that allow that. Number four, am I making healthy choices? So what is it? Am I picking something that's extremely processed? Am I picking something that's, and I'm taking a vegetable and using that vegetable? And five, how much of it am I wasting, right? So it's not just about bringing it home, cooking it and eating it. How much are we actually then throwing either into the garbage or into, hopefully, if we're gonna throw it anywhere, into our compost bin? So this all pretty much ties into what we call our food print. So a lot of times when we talk about the environment or we talk about climate change, we think about our footprint, right? And that's the impact that we have in all of the choices that we make, where we choose to live, how we choose to get around, what we choose to buy, and what we choose to eat. But our food print is the result of everything it takes to get your food from the farm to our plate. So what is the social and environmental impact of our food choices? Well, for one, there's enough food available to feed everybody, yet 790 million people are hungry or undernourished. And I'm sure that number is even larger now since COVID. So that, I will be honest, that number was taken a couple of years ago, so I'm not even 100% sure what that number is right now. 2 billion people in the world don't have regular access to safe and nutritious food, so that ties into issues of food security. 1/3 of all food produced globally goes to waste. So that's like us going to the grocery store, leaving with 3 bags of groceries and leaving one of them right outside your car, not even bothering to take it home with you, right? So just think about that even from a monetary perspective, right? Like what impact that has on your wallet. And in North America, 58% of all food produced is wasted, generating 193 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. So 58%, and it's not just that 58% is wasted, 63% of the food that is wasted could have been eaten. So it was avoidable food waste. It wasn't just peels and seeds and shells and bones. It was actual edible food. That's why it's so important for us to rethink our relationship with our food. So right here, we just have a slide that talks about the foods that have the largest impact on climate change. And if you can see it at the bottom, the 2 items that have the largest impact are beef and lamb. So they do have the largest impact per gram of protein that they produce, while a lot of the plant-based foods tend to have much smaller impacts, right? So what's the deal? So let's look at it this way. So if we had 1 acre of land that we could either raise animals or grow food on, this is what we could do with it. On 1 acre, we could use the land and raise enough beef that would create 250 pounds of beef. And just to give you some perspective, 250 pounds of beef is equivalent to about 1,000 quarter-pound patties. Seems like a decent number of patties, but on that same amount of land, you can either grow 50,000 pounds of tomatoes, 40,000 pounds of potatoes, 30,000 pounds of carrots, or 20,000 pounds of apples. So when you compare that to 1,000 hamburger patties, right, this is a much more useful use of the space. So we talked a little bit about the impact that food has on the climate, but what are food-related climate solutions that we could be exploring? And the nice thing about food-related climate solutions is that they're usually things that we can do as individuals, as households, as a community, right? We don't have to have anybody else make any major decisions for us in order to make these changes in our own life. So the top 3 food-related solutions have to do with how we grow our food. So regenerative agriculture which is just a way of growing the food, like techniques that are less harmful, that actually value the soil that is being used to produce that food and taking care of that soil so that it can continue to grow food, right? Because what a lot of people don't understand is that soil it sequesters so much carbon, so it sucks up so much carbon dioxide that it's actually, helping to fight climate change as well. So the better we take care of the soil, the longer we have it to produce food, and the more it's doing to help combat climate change. The second food-related climate solution is plant-rich diet. So, making that switch from, and it's not something that you have to do everywhere, but just making more of an effort to eat more plant-based proteins or plant foods over animal-based foods, and reducing food waste. So, making sure that we are not putting that avoidable food waste into either our green cart or into the landfill can help as well. And when you look at these, they're very simple actions that we could be taking. We could be making efforts to, choose foods that are grown locally and from farms that are practicing regenerative agriculture. We can make those choices to choose more plant-rich meals. We can make the choice to reduce our food waste. So we talked about how 1/3 of all food produced is lost or wasted, right? And that's not just in shops or restaurants. A lot of it has to do with how we manage our food at home, right? So in a lot of third world countries, you may find a lot of food loss and waste while food is being produced, while it's being transported, whereas here in Canada or North America, a lot of the food is wasted on the consumer end, right? So either in our households, in our grocery stores and things like that. And in Canada, 2.2 million tons of edible food is wasted each year, and a majority of that is actually fruits and vegetables, right? So about almost half of the food wasted here is either fruits or vegetables. 13% of that is leftovers, 9% of that is baked goods, 7% of that is dairy and eggs, 6% is meat, and 20% is other. So that's, things like snacks and drinks and oils and things. That's where those fall, what the category that those fall into. And the problem is when we're wasting food, either, at home or at a restaurant or at the grocery store, we're also wasting all of the resources that went into making that food, right? So that includes the land that was used, the water, the energy and labor, as well as the fuel then that was needed to transport that food to us. So what are some of the things that we could be doing? Well, these are probably things that maybe some of you are already doing. Meal planning, just by taking a few minutes to plan your meals out, and shopping based on those meals rather than just going to the grocery store and saying, oh, maybe I'll cook this week, maybe I'll make this. Just taking those 10 minutes. And you'll notice, like in front of you, we've given you all laminated meal planners. So you can, use a dry erase marker, and you can use that to help you plan your meals for the week. And on the back side, there's actually even 5 tips for helping you with meal planning. Loving your leftovers. It's not just about, taking that leftover for lunch the next day, but look at them as ingredients. How might those leftovers, maybe you can put enough in the freezer, or maybe, you're okay with taking it for lunch the next day, but maybe, there's something that you can do with it later on in the week, right? So I like to make a red lentil chickpea curry that one night we'll eat as a curry over rice, and then later on in the week, if there's only a little bit left, I usually make like a poutine out of it, right? So just being creative with how we're using those leftovers. Learning about best before over expiry dates. That's a huge one for a lot of people. I think a lot of people just, that you hit that best before date and whatever it is goes out into the garbage, when in truth, there's only a handful of items that need to be tossed after their best before date. There's only, I believe it's 5 items that have an actual expiry date. That is like meal supplements, nutritional supplements, formula, and things like Ensure. What am I missing? That's about it, right? So it's really only that handful of items that after that date, you should toss them out. The rest, it's more about, that's the best before. That doesn't mean that it's terrible after kind of thing, right? And you'll have actually, one of the other handouts that you have does talk about some of the common food items. Yeah, and if they're close to best before or expiry, you can then, it tells you when you can put them into the freezer, how long they'll last from the freezer. So that'll help extend the life of a lot of the different foods that we're used to, looking at those best before versus expiry dates on. How we store our food, right? So, a lot of times, in the refrigerator, there are spots that are colder or not as cold, and on the backside of that same sheet, you'll actually see an image of a refrigerator that'll tell you specifically what the best places are in the fridge for keeping certain items so that you can prolong the life of those items. And then last but not least, composting, right? So when we do have unavoidable food scraps, or unfortunately something does get to the point where it is unedible, making sure that those items go into your green cart rather than into the landfill is very important. A lot of times, I think people are under the impression that, if it goes to the landfill, it's gonna rot naturally because it's a food item, and that's it, and it'll biodegrade. But the problem is when garbage is piled on top of each other, there's a lack of oxygen. And so without the oxygen, that food can't actually biodegrade. So they've dug up food that's 40 years old. Like they've dug up lettuce from the landfill and it still looks like a head of lettuce, but it's been there for 40 years, right? And the problem with that too is that food, when it rots, lets off methane gas. And methane gas is actually even a lot more potent than carbon dioxide when it comes to the impacts on the planet, right? So please remember, compost when you need to get rid of your food, because that can be turned around. And then in a matter of a couple of months, that compost gets turned around into rich, healthy soil that you can be using in your gardens. Does anybody have any questions about food waste?
Years ago, you could go into a grocery store, and if they had leftover vegetables, they would give it to you. Now it all goes out in the garbage. Used to go if the Boyd State stores would be their cheese or cold cuts would be marked down. Now it's all thrown out because someone gets a bad piece and they complain and they're in trouble. Now all that is going over, I don't know, was it 12 or 13 billion dollars a year thrown out from grocery stores? And that's just terrible to have to happen. It's too bad we're not lobbying these people to say, or give it to the soup kitchens and that kind of thing.
I'll be honest, because we've, as a group at Eco-Caledon, we've attempted to lobby local businesses to donate their surplus food, and restaurants and grocery stores. And it is very difficult because they have this idea that they're going to be sued if somebody ends up feeling sick from the food that was donated, when in truth, there's actually laws that prevent that from happening. As long as they're following their own food safety, and whoever's receiving the food is following food safety, that is completely, a viable option for reducing food waste. The other problem is that so the grocery stores have racks that have 50% off and whatnot, but when you look at that rack, it's not a ton of food, right? So Lord knows that's not how they're getting rid of all of their food. There have been instances when I've gone into some of the local stores where you see them throwing out tons of food, right? Because it's hit. Now for the grocery store, once something's hit its expiry date, then it's different, then they can't sell it. But if they had thought to donate it a couple of days earlier, then we could have done something more about it, right? That's something that we're trying to do through Eco-Caledon. We've got a little subcommittee called Gratitude for Food, the group that's actually making lunch today. And what we try to do is we're working with some of the local farmers and some of the local grocers, and we'll take surplus food and we'll make meals out of it. And then those meals will get donated to the exchange, which is our local food bank, right? So Jason's gonna talk a little bit about his experience as a completely plant-based athlete, but that that isn't the best choice for everyone. I myself I like to call myself a wannabe vegan because I'm almost there, not quite. But I eat a little bit of cheese and dairy still in my diet. But even just making that shift in itself, I know it has a positive impact. So the Planetary Health Diet is a global reference diet for adults that's through the UN. that symbolically represents about half a plate of fruits and vegetables. So that's, and that really, it reflects our food guide here in Canada as well, right? When you look at the new food guide, half of our plate should be full of fruits and vegetables. And then we can, move on, and a portion of it would be dedicated to grains and nuts. And if, by choice, you want to still include some animal proteins in your diet, then that's an option. But it's more about, the way we look at it is, it's not about making meat the star of the dish. It's about making fruits and vegetables the star of the dish. Rather than making that the main part, making it more of a supporting actor, right, in your food choices. And again, we've got also, that helps when it comes to, maybe somebody's dietary needs or restrictions, or even just personal preferences or cultural choices, right? So when it's not always easy to make that switch over, taking those kinds of things into consideration. Here we're just comparing. So let's take a very common plant-based protein, chickpeas, right? So that's probably one of the easiest ones. I use it quite often. And let's compare it. So 100 grams of chickpeas to compare to 100 grams of chicken. So in regards to protein, they're pretty much on par, right? So 19 grams in chickpeas, 20 grams in the chicken. When it comes to saturated fat, now we've got some numbers to look at, right? So only 0.6 grams of saturated fat in 100 grams of chickpeas compared to 4.5 grams of saturated fat in a piece of chicken. When it comes to fiber, great, 17 grams of fiber in 100 grams of chickpeas, 0 grams of fiber in that 100 grams of chicken. Iron, 6.2 milligrams in the chickpeas, 0 milligrams of iron in the chicken. Calcium, 105 milligrams of calcium in chickpeas, 0 milligrams in the chicken. And cholesterol, here's a great one, 0 milligrams of cholesterol in the chickpeas, whereas compared to 75 milligrams of cholesterol in the chicken. So when you look at it that way, it's not just about the protein, it's about all the other different nutrients and things that you get from a lot of those plant-based proteins, right? So some of the actions that we could be taking at home are obviously eating less meat. I mean, and let's look at the burger really quickly, right? So it takes about 2,500 liters of water to make that one beef patty, and that's the water that goes into raising the cattle and slaughtering and processing and whatnot, compared to, say, it's a vegetable-based protein that takes a lot less water and land and things to grow. And on top of that has the equivalent protein, or maybe even more, and includes all of those other nutrients as well. Something else we can do when we're out and about, so this one's pretty common for me anyway, plant-based meat alternatives. Now, it's not something that you want to put into your diet like every day, like you don't want to be eating those alternatives every day because, again, they are processed. But a lot of times when you're out, it's one of the few options that you can find on a restaurant menu. So, that's another choice we could be making. Consuming less dairy. So milk and butter are actually, I mean, if we go back to that slide, milk and butter and cheese, they're actually very intensive and create a lot of greenhouse gases. So consuming just a little bit less of that. And I find even in a lot of households, even households that are still very meat-centric, a lot of people have made switches to things like almond milk and oat milk or soy milk, right? So just making those small switches once in a while is great. And if we're going to choose to eat meat, just being thoughtful about our animal protein, right? So again, when it goes back to like when we talk about where our food is grown or how it's raised, being cautious of the companies that we're buying from and what are they doing. Avoiding palm oil, right? I mean, a lot of us have heard about the issues with palm oil. It causes deforestation. It's causing extinction of different animals. A lot of times you'll think of orangutans when you think of what's happening to the rainforest. But a lot of times we don't notice that palm oil is in so many of the different products that we buy. So, it's about being very, very cautious of what we're purchasing at the grocery store, but also, something else we can be doing is signing petitions and advocating for better laws around palm oil. And protecting our bees. I mean, that's 1 in every 3 bites that we take is thanks to our bees, and we want to be doing our best to protect them as well, right? Because they are incredible decline at the moment.
Yeah, since we're talking about bees and pollinators, I just wanted to mention it's May, and the little slogan is No Mow May. So the idea is please do not mow your lawns until June, because this is the month when those bees and other pollinators are nesting. You know, they're sitting in those flowers in the grasses. And if you mow it, you mow their homes down, right? And you're ruining their habitat. So just put up with the lovely, beautiful dandelions for this month, and you know what? You'll be okay, and the world will be a little better off.
Yeah, the idea of keeping the grass taller so that they can continue to nest and do their thing, I think is really important. Yeah, so any way that we can, right? And now, lunch is going to be brought out shortly, but I am going to pass it over to Jason here to do a quick chat around his experience and how he manages to be not only just an athlete, but a triathlete on a plant-rich diet. Here's our success story.
I'm standing here today as somebody who eats a lot of plant-based food. I've been vegan since 2009. I love eating. I love training. As a triathlete, I do swimming, biking, and running. But I haven't always been this way. You know, haven't always been a vegan. Haven't always been into these sports. I grew up eating a very standard Canadian diet, what I would consider, you know, probably what most of us are used to eating. I don't know, lots of food that looks like this. This is how most of my meals would have looked. Maybe not all this fancy, but you know, these kinds of foods were essentially what I was eating until I was 19. And I grew up playing hockey. It was pretty clear by the time I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years old that I was not exceptionally talented as an athlete. You know, I was okay, but yeah, I wasn't going to be going to the NHL. I accepted that, and I just kind of, you know, moved towards things that I seemed to be a little bit more talented in, which included music. So I actually remember I played a concert when I was in early high school in this building for you know, some people who were just like a small little thing. So it's funny how it comes back around to hear him speaking about eating plant-based food today. But yeah, that was sort of I went to university for music, did the Humber College Jazz Studies program, and I was working and teaching professionally as a musician for many years. But it was during my time in university that I came down with strep throat, which is actually something that I dealt with a lot as I was growing up. I would keep getting strep throat, you know, once or twice a year, and I'd go to the doctor and would be told, oh, here, take these antibiotics and you'll be fine in a couple weeks. And after that happening so many times, again and again, I started asking myself why I kept getting sick. And so looking into it, I found that for many people, dairy products can be problematic. They can cause, you know, ear, nose, throat issues, all kinds of different reactions. So it was that knowledge, as well as some knowledge about how animals are treated for food that really didn't sit well with me, just ethically, like seeing, you know, the slaughterhouse footage and just, all of the suffering that animals endure, combined with the health reasons for moving animal products out of my diet, led me to become, I adopted a 100% plant-based diet in 2009. And at first, it took a little getting used to. There were, you know, a few weeks, maybe a few months there where I was really trying to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and fresh foods, and you know, I was feeling great, but I was actually starting to lose some weight, and after a little while I started to feel low energy. And this is something that's really common when people go to eat more plant-based food or more, you know, healthier food, especially lots of fruits and vegetables, is that people will say, oh, I felt great for a few weeks, but then I felt like I had no energy. And the first thing people think is that it's protein. They think, oh, well, I must be missing protein, so I don't have the energy. But it's actually not the protein so much as it is just the overall calories. If you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, there's lots of water in that, and it's very low calorie density. So you have to really eat a lot of these foods to meet your calorie needs, which was a mistake that I made at first, is I wasn't eating enough of the, you know, the cooked grains and more dense sources of calories from plant-based foods. But as soon as I started to incorporate those more dense calorie sources, I really started to feel amazing, and I wanted to use up some of the extra energy that I had. So I started getting back into sports a little bit. For many years, I had just been doing music, and I was totally out of shape. But then I started doing a little bit of running, and I was running so much that my legs started to hurt. So I was like, okay, well, what else can I do? I'll do some cycling. And so I got into running and cycling, and then I had this experience where I nearly drowned in the ocean. I was in Hawaii and I got swept out in a riptide, and I could keep myself afloat in a pool, but I really realized then that I didn't know how to swim and that it would probably be useful to learn how to swim. So that's what I did. And then behold, I was doing swimming, biking, and running, and I learned about triathlon, which is a sport that puts all these together. And I thought, hey, this is fun. Maybe I'll sign up for one of these triathlon things. And there is a race that is actually, it doesn't take place anymore, but up in Aurelia, they had a triathlon every year for many years. And so I signed up back in 2013. This is the first race that I did. It was a 750-meter swim, 33-kilometer bike, and then a 7-kilometer run. And out of about 600 people, I came 122nd. So not the best result, not the most impressive result, but pretty okay, first time out. And the most important thing was I really enjoyed it. Like I love training. I love being outside, having the different sports so that I could, get in the water, get out on the roads, get on the trails for running. So I really enjoyed the sport, and doing the race really made me motivated to, take my training a little bit more seriously. And I was doing a ton of training. I realized as I graduated from university, I had always wanted to move and live somewhere else in the world, experience another country. So I took an opportunity. I had to go and teach English as a second language in Thailand, and I moved out there for several years. And it was great because, there was warm weather, there was delicious food. Anytime I wasn't teaching, I could be outside swimming, biking, or running, and it was great. And I didn't have to deal with the cold winters and snowy weather that we have here. But there was another issue in Thailand that I didn't expect to have to run into. But it turns out that there is some pretty terrible air quality, especially in northern Thailand, which is where I was living for part of my time in Thailand. I was in Chiang Mai, which is northern Thailand. It's in the mountains. And these two photos show what it looks like at two different times of the year. So on the left, we've got a nice clear sky. The color's a little bit off on the presentation here, but you can see clear sky. You can see the mountains in the background on the left. That's during the rainy season, probably sometime in, I don't know, maybe June or July. Versus on the right, this is probably taken maybe February or March, and this is the smoky season. They have the worst air quality in the world. Like if you look at the air quality of different cities in the world during this time of year, you'll see Chiang Mai is up there at the top of the list with the most polluted air on the planet out of any city during that time of year. So it's like hazardous air quality, not ideal for being outside swimming, biking, and running all day. So this is something that I kind of realized, okay, well, I'm going to have to deal with this somehow. But wait a second here, what is actually causing this issue? Really what's happening at this time of year is this agricultural burning and deforestation, right? They're cutting down forests, burning the forests that they've cut down, but then also they're using that extra space to grow crops, mostly maize, mostly corn, which is fed to animals. Because you see, worldwide, in countries like Canada and a lot of developed nations, we've kind of reached peak meat, if that makes sense. Like a lot of countries are actually consuming now less meat, developed nations. But when we look at developing nations, they're eating more and more meat, and globally, meat consumption is going up and up. And so we need more feed for these animals. We need more animals to meet the demand, and so we need more feed, and we need more space for that feed. And so that's the main driver of deforestation globally, is to create this space for growing crops like corn and soy, which are mostly fed to animals. So that is really what's going on here. But when you ask people in Chiang Mai, most of them don't know that. It's kind of swept under the rug, and the root problem is rarely addressed. I had to actually go and speak to people at the University of Chiang Mai to understand what's actually going on here and to get an understanding of the agricultural practices. But yeah, it's pretty terrible. I mean, riding through the countryside there would be beautiful. Again, this is the same place 2 different times of the year, and you can see there's corn mixed in with virgin forest, which each year they're chipping more into that forest to grow more corn, and then that's what it looks like after they harvest. They harvest the corn, they burn the unused parts of the plants, and they're also burning the forest matter that they've cut down. And so it's pretty incredible. And just thinking globally, this is the main reason for deforestation, is demand for animal protein, because when, again, the demand for the protein goes up, we need more animals, we need more space to grow the crops. So the main driver of deforestation, and by connection, the species extinction that we're seeing, all these species who no longer have their habitats, they're going extinct. And just to give some context to this, so if you looked at our planet 10,000 years ago, you would have seen very few humans, relatively speaking, and we had very few farm animals back then. 99% of the mammal biomass on Earth 10,000 years ago would have been wild animals, right? Humans and any domesticated animals we would have made up less than 1% of the total, mass of mammals on the planet. But what do you think that percentage is today? So what percentage of mammal biomass do you think is still wild animals? Let's do a show of, is that a question or, okay, let's do a show of hands, right? So who thinks it's still more than 80%? You're gonna hope, okay. So that means that everybody thinks it's less than 80%. So put your hand up if you think it's less than 80%, and then we'll keep your hand up. So keep your hand up if you think it's less than 60%, less than 40%, less than 20%, less than 10%, less than 5%. It's actually right, it's 4%. So it is just incredible how we've changed the planet. Coming back, you're saying, yes, we know that it's us. And really the main driver is our demand for animal protein. And it's something that it's uncomfortable to address because, myself included, growing up, all of our favorite meals and all that are based around animal protein. But that's really what I hope is a main takeaway here today is that by switching that and switching to plant-based proteins, the good news is we can have an incredible positive effect. So we have this unfortunate event, which is the largest extinction event in 65 million years. Is happening right now due to mostly our appetite for animal protein. But this is the good news. So what this shows is they wanted to figure out, how much of an impact would it have if we actually shifted, and theoretically, of course, because not everybody's going to go vegan overnight, but let's say everybody adopted, primarily, we'll call it, 95, 98% plant-based diet. If we're eating the vast majority of our food is from plant-based, what effect could we have? This is the amount of land that we could give back to nature. It's about the size of Africa. That's how much extra land has been deforested, wildlife habitats have been displaced, all of that, just so that we can create the animal protein that we have an appetite for. So if we shifted back to eating, more plant-based food, we could then rewild this much land, which would not only create, environments for endangered species to bounce back, it's also going to sequester a ridiculous amount of carbon, right? Because there's been so many trees that have been cut down to create this farmland that if we rewild that land, it would sequester so much carbon. So it's not only reducing the emissions from animal agriculture, but it's also actually creating more carbon sequestration potential there. So this is also because it's so much more efficient, right? It's so much more efficient to just eat the plants directly, as we saw in another slide, right? Like the amount of plant-based food you can create on a piece of land versus the amount of animal protein, there's just no comparison. It's exponential. So, and there was a paper that came out, they were looking at, this is just a year ago, if we were to rapidly phase out, so rapid transition away from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture, we could actually stabilize greenhouse gas levels for 30 years. Just if we did that like right away, we could do that. And over the century, we would offset 68% of CO2 emissions for the entire century. And that's, again, taking into account all of the sequestration of carbon that would occur if we were to rewild a lot of that land that we would no longer need for agriculture. So this is the potential solution. This is like the best case scenario, right? Now, in reality, is everybody going to go vegan overnight? Probably not going to happen. But at the end of the day, the more we can shift in that direction, and those of us who can, not everybody has the choice, but those of us who can choose to eat more plant-based food, it's definitely the more we can do, the better. So anyways, back to, I'm there in Thailand. I bought an air purifier for my apartment so that I could breathe clean air, and I'm wearing a mask outside, but I'm also thinking what can I do about this issue? I'm realizing that not only has my health improved by eating more plant-based food, And not only am I contributing less to animal suffering, but also this is a major part of the solution to the climate crisis that we're facing. So I was thinking a lot about this, and why is it that people eat so much meat? Why is it that animal protein is just fixed at the center of our meals? And really, it comes down to, when people think protein, they think meat, and we think we need protein to be fit and strong and healthy. And when athletes especially think about, a lot of athletes are concerned about getting enough protein. And the first thing that the vast majority of athletes will think about when they think of where am I going to get my protein is they think of meat. It's like we have this connection that is not based in reality, but just in our brains. We think we need animal protein to be fit and healthy and strong and all of these things. And it's true, we can get protein from meat, but we can also get all the protein we need from plants. So here I'm thinking, okay, well, since people have this belief and I'm training for triathlons and I could tell that I was getting fitter, but I hadn't been racing, but I thought, okay, you know what? I've learned about all these environmental impacts. I want to help to try to shift people's thinking about their need for animal protein. Maybe I'll sign up for another race and I'll see how I do. And so I'll see, okay, has my fitness improved? It had been about 3 years since that first race I did in Aurelia. I signed up for another race in Thailand, and to my surprise, I actually won that race overall. So I was first athlete of the day. Thank you. Thank you. I say this not to brag, but it was a huge surprise to me because, again, I had accepted my fate as not being, much of an athlete when I was young. And so to be able to come around and win a race, hey, I was pretty happy about that. So I came back during the summertime, and I thought, well, I want to go test myself at the same race that I had done back in 2013. So I went back to the Aurelia Triathlon in 2017 and actually won that race overall as well. So I went from 122nd to first place. So that's pretty good. And yeah, it's been really good. I've continued racing. I've been able to win a few other races overall and have gone to the world championships now. And I was the champion for my age group in the regional championship in Southeast Asia. So I've had a lot of success, and I've got my friend there. The best part has been that it's kind of worked. I've been able to meet a lot of other athletes, and this friend of mine, Shane, who's beside me on the podium, he came second place. And this is a few years ago. He's actually now a professional cyclist, and I was able to, some people say I converted him, but it was really he just came to the understanding by himself and by maybe hours and hours of me lecturing him on our long bike rides. But one way or another, I've been able to have some influence on other athletes, which I'm really happy about because so many people just have that belief that they need animal protein, and it's just not true. So I'm actually, there's a triathlon series here in Ontario, which is the long course triathlon series. And I was the second overall ranked athlete last year. So this year I'll be fighting for that top #1 spot. But at the end of the day, I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not racing on the world stage or anything like that. But some people will use that and they'll say, okay, well, you're a pretty successful, amateur athlete, but if you want to be one of the top athletes in the world, you're going to have to eat animal protein. I've had people say that to me. So is animal protein needed to become one of the top athletes in the world? Well, the fact that all of these athletes are plant-based would tell you that it's not. And these are some of the top athletes in the world. I don't know if anyone can recognize any of these athletes here. A few notable mentions. What's that? Or Novak Djokovic here, right? Other tennis player. But someone we should definitely mention is Megan Duhamel, Canadian figure skater, right? Who's won several Olympic medals for Canada. And she was actually just last weekend, there was Planted Expo, which is a plant-based event that took place in Toronto. She was speaking at. And another notable mention, because many people will say, okay, well, you can do the plant-based diet if you're doing endurance sports or maybe something like this, but if you want to build serious muscle, that's not going to work. Well, what about Patrick Baboumian? He, again, in Toronto back in 2013, he set a world record for the most weight ever carried by a human being. And it's just an insane amount of weight. If you can imagine picking up a grand piano and carrying that across the room, or perhaps picking up an adult horse and carrying the horse across the room, that's the kind of weight this guy's throwing around, and he's done this 100% on a plant-based diet. So all different kinds of athletes can make it work. Maybe we'll watch a short little 2-minute trailer here for the Game Changers documentary, which, has anyone seen this documentary already? So it came out on Netflix, and then it disappeared from Netflix, and now it's back on Netflix. So if you're a Netflix person, you can watch it on Netflix. We'll just take a couple minutes here to watch the trailer. Yeah, really great little documentary to watch.
One and only Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I ate a lot of meat. They showed us commercials
Steak. That's what a man eats.
selling that idea that real men eat meat.
Serious man food.
But you got to understand, that's marketing. That's not based on reality.
I've been teaching fighting techniques to government agencies for more than 15 years. Then, I got injured. Unable to teach for at least 6 months, I spent more than 1,000 hours studying science on recovery and nutrition, and stumbled across a study about the Roman gladiators.
The gladiators were predominantly vegetarian.
How could the original professional fighters be so powerful, eating only plants?
When I made the switch to a plant-based diet, I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
When I went plant-based, I wasn't sure if I was gonna survive. And I actually became like a machine.
One of the biggest misconceptions in sports nutrition is that we have to have animal protein to perform at a high level. That's just not true.
Sometimes you have to do things that you know your competitors aren't doing.
Today's blood and yesterday's blood.
Damn.
I think this is going to wake a lot of people up.
I was recovering better, not getting as sore. This was our best season in the last 15 years, and we had 14 guys on plant-based diets.
We all want to feel great, have more energy.
Cholesterol was 276. Today, 169.
Whoa, now you're talking.
Most guys my age can keep up with the grandchildren. My grandchildren can't keep up with me.
It's not one set of dietary guidelines for improving your performance as an athlete, another one for reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes. It's the same for all of them.
Someone asked me, how could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? And my answer was, have you ever seen an ox eating meat?
Yeah, highly recommend that one. Again, it's called The Game Changers. It's on Netflix, and it's really, really good, super entertaining. The question is still, though, that I get asked most often, where will I get my protein, right? If I'm eating more plant-based, and we've talked about it already, so I think this question has already been kind of more or less answered. There are plenty of places to get your protein from plant-based foods. And the next question, though, because a lot of times people, I think, are confused about this, is how much protein do we actually need? So there's 2 things here, right? There's like your kind of 0.8 gram, which is just for everyone, right? And then you've got athletes who their demands will be higher. But it's important to note it's not just the protein demands, right? It's everything. They're gonna need more carbohydrates, they're gonna need more calories in general. And the range that's given for athletes is somewhere between 1.2 grams to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And so that is actually, like for athletes, if you're looking at in the middle of that, 1.6 grams is, they've found it's kind of a threshold where beyond that, you're not gonna absorb any more protein. Like if you're getting 1.6, which is right in that range, if you're somewhere around 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, that's pretty much, you're getting all the benefits there. If you eat more protein beyond that, your body's not necessarily gonna be able to use it. So it's kind of this threshold where a lot of people think more protein is better. And if you're getting your protein like most people are from red and processed meats, well, there's a lot of saturated fat, cholesterol, there are other carcinogens in those sources of protein. So if you're just eating as much of that as you can, you're probably not getting the benefits you think you are, and in fact are likely doing yourself a disservice. Whereas, the plant-based foods, it's really not hard to hit these numbers. Like I rarely think about protein because there's just protein in so many different plant-based foods. And, as long as you're eating enough calories, it's very hard actually to not get enough protein. So it's not like it's a real challenge. It's just about, finding maybe those foods that you like. But and I think I even heard someone say, there might've been someone whispering here, like, a lot of times people have this idea, they'll say, isn't animal protein better than plant protein for building muscle? Like, isn't it just like higher quality? And this is something that a lot of people think. Now, interestingly, there was a study done, and this is 2021, so fairly recent, and they looked at this exact question. They took a group of, I think it was, 19 young men who were vegans and 19 young men who were omnivores. And what they did was they put them on, they made sure that their diet had exactly that 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So they were all getting the same amount of protein. The only difference was, obviously, the vegans were getting entirely plant-based protein, and the omnivores would have been getting a mix in reality, right? They're getting a mix of animal protein and plant-based protein. And it was a healthy diet, whole food focused, so that, the quality of protein was there, quality of food was good, and they were looking to see if there would be any difference in their training adaptations, right? Their strength induced training adaptations. And they found no difference. So the vegan group was able to gain strength and gain muscle mass just as easily as the omnivorous group. So there was no difference there at all, which is contrary to what a lot of people believe. They would have said, that the omnivores are going to have an easier time building strength and muscle. Does not appear to be the case at all. And so there was no difference there. And this kind of helps explain why a lot of people will say, plant-based proteins, they're not complete. They don't have all the amino acids. When in fact they do. All plant-based proteins have all of the essential amino acids, and the vast majority of them have all of the non-essential amino acids as well. So if you're wondering, amino acids are the building blocks of protein. They're what protein is made up of, and every food has kind of a different combination of amino acids. But as long as you're eating a variety of plant-based foods, you're going to get all of the different amino acids in more, in the quantity that you need. Some foods might be lower in one amino acid than the other, but as long as you're eating a variety of different plant-based foods, you're not going to run into any issues. But people make a big deal about this because they'll say, look at the essential amino acids in the animal foods are, consistent, and then in the plant-based foods they vary more. It's not been shown to be an issue, and Is there
anything that's not encompassed in that portion of the Venn diagram?
Sure.
You're still missing that you should take a supplement for or find another means of.
Well, B12 is definitely one that, we all need B12, and there's definitely, if you look at in people who are on plant-based diets, the need to, supplement for B12, that can be a thing. It can also be a thing for people who are on an omnivorous diet, like they may have a challenge getting B12 as well. But B12 is definitely important. A lot of plant-based foods are fortified with B12. And the thing with B12 if you remember about one thing about B12, remember we're all taking a B12 supplement in one way or another, whether it's first-hand or second-hand, because all the animal products which have B12 in them, all of those animals, their feed is supplemented with B12. So it's like you're taking a B12 supplement. Are you getting it? I have a spray that I take. So in addition to plant-based cereals and milks and things that are fortified with B12, I have like a spray that I take just to make sure, because you can't go wrong. Like if you have too much B12, it just comes out in your urine, right? So it's the kind of thing where, you want to definitely check. It's an easy thing to check on a blood test. Like if you're doing blood work regularly, you definitely want to catch if you're low in B12 because it is really, really important. And it can really show up if somebody goes onto a vegan diet and they're not taking any B12 supplements, then it can be an issue for sure, right? So it's
probably why it comes up a lot when it comes to switching.
Yeah, but the thing is, at the end of the day, though, it's not like if you say, okay, I would go on a plant-based diet, but I don't want to be B12 deficient, so therefore I'm not going to do it. It's not really a reason not to do it because it's so easy to supplement, to monitor. But yes, it's a separate thing from protein as well, for sure.
Anything else like that?
That is really like some people. Sure, some people will raise omega-3s. Like that's another thing that gets raised. People will say, okay, well, where are you going to get your omega-3s? And you can get them from whole, flaxseed, chia seed. Like there are plant-based foods that have plenty of omega-3, or you can actually go to, okay, well, when people hear omega-3, what do you think of? What do people take for omega-3? Fish, right? Where do the fish get the omega-3? If you go far enough down the chain, they got it from seaweed. And it's really easy to take an algae-based DHA, omega-3. Yeah, you can get it just from eating sea vegetables, but you can also take like a supplement, like a pill, where they've just taken the omega-3s from the seaweed and put it into a supplement. So you can get it multiple ways. There's nothing that, put it this way, if you want to exclude animal products from your diet completely, you can totally do it. There are a few things like this is really it, like B12, the omega-3s, vitamin D for us for everybody, right? But I mean, it's and this is not like a personal health consult. Everybody has a different situation, so it's always advisable to work with doctors and things like that. But yeah, there's no like stopping point where, okay, well, we can't eat plant-based food because of this. Every issue that could possibly come up, there are ways to work around it. But the protein one is definitely one that it's the first like roadblock for a lot of people. They're wondering, is the plant-based protein really as good? And it certainly is. You can get all the amino acids and everything that you need. And even, are there performance-enhancing benefits to plant-based eating? Because as we saw in the trailer there, a lot of the athletes were saying how they felt like they could recover faster, or they were, performing better after switching to a plant-based diet, which is kind of contrary to what a lot of people would think. A lot of people think, oh, vegans, they're weak and, deficient or whatever. But this study here was interesting because, so this is back 2020, again, still fairly recent. This one looking at women and not only at strength adaptations, but also their endurance. So strength and endurance were looked at here. And what was interesting, so this is a slightly larger group, so there were 56 in total, so 28 of each, 28 vegans and 28 omnivores, and they had all been either vegan or omnivore for 2 years before the study. And they looked at all these different measurements, their body composition, estimated VO2 max, their time to exhaustion, their muscle strength in terms of leg and chest press. Like they tested all these different things. And what was interesting is they were comparable in many respects, but they actually found that the vegan athletes had higher VO2 max and higher time to exhaustion, so their sub-maximal endurance. And that's really interesting because it totally contradicts the popular belief of people thinking that we need meat to be fit and strong, whereas here we have the vegan athletes who are actually showing higher VO2 max and time submaximal endurance, which are really helpful for things like triathlon, which I do. And so when I see this study here, I say, okay, well, that explains it. That explains how I've been able to go from this incredibly, average, athlete into somebody who's able to show up and win races, right? So, because it didn't really make sense to me, but that study helped me kind of figure it out. And it's nice though, because there are lots of athletes out there who they say that this thing or the other works, and that's it's great to hear what's working for people. But at the end of the day, we need studies that are done, and these are 2 studies that we just saw where they specifically look at vegan athletes, and there aren't that many studies where they've been able to specifically look at vegan athletes. But the studies that have been done, they are showing that a lot of the things that vegan athletes are saying or plant-based athletes are saying, they are backed up by science. And when we talk about the food guide, it's a similar thing. But there are only a few studies looking at vegan athletes, but there is a huge body of evidence for the benefits of plant-based eating. Like it's just, when the Canada Food Guide was redone in 2019, a lot of people around the world were applauding Canada because it's the most evidence-based food guide out of any country in the world. It's really, really solid in the evidence. So, hey, yeah, that's good. And it's amazing to see the change, right? Because here's an earlier version of the food guide, and you can see it wasn't intended to be viewed as a plate, but it kind of, it shows, we've got dairy and alternatives, and then meat and alternatives is half the plate. That's how people used to conceptualize of it, right? That's what we used to think. And then you've got your breads and your fruits and vegetables. Whereas now we've got half the plate is fruits and vegetables, a quarter of the plate is whole grain foods, and then the remaining quarter is protein foods. And interestingly, when they talk about what kind of protein foods we should be focused on, it's the plant-based protein foods that they're really emphasizing. So again, we've got the first food guide here, another one, previous versions of the food guide there. They've all got a milk and dairy category and a meat category. But here it's much different. You know, they're really saying to choose those protein foods that come from plants more often, because plant-based protein foods can provide more fiber and less saturated fat than the other types of protein foods. Typically, animal-based foods not going to have the fiber, and they'll be higher in saturated fat. So it's beneficial for our heart health, and it's great to see Canada's Food Guide moving in this direction. So that quarter of the plate that we all spend so much, protein is like the one macronutrient that gets the most attention. But in reality, and this is also, I think, really important, the rest of the plate is carbohydrates. And how much do we hear about, low carbs are bad, carbs are evil? That is just not based in scientific evidence. Like, I'm sorry, but like the majority of our diet should be made up of carbohydrate-rich foods, which are fruits and vegetables. They're carbohydrates, and the whole grain foods, carbohydrates as well, right? So that's not to say that we should be, guzzling sugar and refined, highly processed foods all the time, but we should not be afraid of carbohydrates and the natural sugars that occur in these foods. And when it comes to fats, but they're not really saying in the plate, we can't really see, but they are saying here, right, you want to choose those healthy fats, which tend to be the unsaturated fats. So looking at the saturated fat content in food, trying to keep the saturated fat low, and generally the plant-based foods will do that for you, although there are some exceptions, like coconut oil is super high in saturated fat. There are some plant-based foods that are high in saturated fat, but generally the plant-based foods tend to be a lot healthier in terms of the type of fats that are in them. And the water drink of choice, different from in the past, all the promotion of dairy that's not really seen so much, like the, dairy foods are included, but less industry influence has resulted in a lot of these changes.
Wasn't the last food guide didn't have a glass of milk next to the plate?
I think so. Yeah. Like that was kind of the thinking, is that, you got to have your milk, and that's really important. But 44% of Canadians have some kind of dairy sensitivity or lactose, and like 44%. So why would you have dairy as like a staple food if almost half the country can't tolerate it? It doesn't make sense. It's the most common food intolerance in the country. So water will do better. And a lot of people are often asking, this will be the last thing before we move on, but a lot of people are wondering what plant-based athletes eat in a day. This is an example of what Morgan Mitchell eats. She's one of the athletes who was featured in the documentary. I've kind of taken her blurb there of, describing a typical day of eating there and just put some images there. But starting off with like some toast with banana, peanut butter, that kind of thing, maple syrup, smoothies, dates, great high energy, high calorie fruit that you can have, vegan burgers, rice, vegan pizza, like anything that you can make. And this is what I think we're going to be moving on to as well, is like making a plant-based version of any food that you like is a great idea. Like, take your favorite meals, try to make a plant-based version of them. And, if something doesn't work, that's okay. Maybe tofu doesn't work, so you try seitan or whatever it is, right? But trying to, there's absolutely no reason that we can't be totally enjoying food and making it, predominantly, if not entirely, plant-based. I will genuinely tell you, I enjoy food so much more after going plant-based than I did before. Because before, I ate all the same foods all the time. And after I said, okay, I'm going to try to eat more plant-based food, what do I eat? Opened up a whole new world of foods that I never even knew existed before, like, seitan and durian and, tempeh, all these foods. So I genuinely enjoy food so much more now. The kind of foods that I eat, I like to start my day with fruit. It's easy, hydrating. I find it delicious, especially in the morning. So often I'll start with, just straight up fruit or blend it in a smoothie, something like that. Usually that's like the pre-workout, and then I'll usually go swim and then come back and have maybe a smoothie bowl or some oats, oatmeal with some nuts, maybe some berries on top, maple syrup, that kind of thing. But sometimes if I'm feeling like I want to get fancy, I'll make up a tofu scramble or, sort of a more traditional kind of breakfast with some plant-based sausages or something like that. Lunch, moving on to, typically I'll do a lot of sandwiches, wraps, salad bowls and things like that. Sushi, one of my favorites. I love going to sushi restaurants because they've got lots of plant-based options. And all-you-can-eat sushi is, my best friend when you're training and eating as much as I do. This here, anyone know what this is? What this might be made of? Looks like pulled pork, but it's actually pulled jackfruit, right? It's really delicious. Yeah, so if you like pulled pork sandwiches, that's a great substitute. And this actually, I just tried the PC, like in Loblaws you can get, they do like a smoked barbecue jackfruit that comes packaged. It's like $3 and it's super cheap and really, really delicious. And I just tried it for the first time yesterday, so that's a recommendation if you're looking for that. When you look at the cost of the animal products, they're heavily subsidized, right? So the real cost would be much more. But because when you look at how food subsidies are distributed in Canada, the vast majority of them are going to animal agriculture because it's so much harder to farm animals, and those farmers and those industries need support to be able to, maintain these affordable prices. And our taxes are exactly. And so there is they used to be called Nation Rising, and now it's Canadians for Responsible Food Policy who are trying to change that. Because currently it's only about 10 or 11%. They're researching into what the actual numbers are for subsidies because they're quite difficult to get a straight answer on. But suffice to say, there's a very small amount of subsidies that are going to, making plant-based foods more affordable. So hopefully that should be switched in the near future, because it shouldn't be that, those plant-based options are more expensive, and I'm sure that in the years to come they will become cheaper. But yeah, burgers for dinner, you don't have to go to the store and buy those kind of Beyond or Impossible burgers. You can make up. There are thousands of different delicious recipes for homemade plant-based burgers you can make with whole healthy foods. There are thousands of different kinds of curries you can make. I love Thai food after being in Thailand for so many years, so I love to make different kinds of Thai curries and Indian curries. Pasta, Italian food is very, very easy to veganize. Pasta is super calorie dense for me, so I do a lot of that. Some people, when they go vegan, it's like they're eating the processed foods all day, and yeah, it might be better for the environment, but there are so many health benefits to including those whole plant-based foods as well. So that's an important thing to remember. Keep yourself happy. Eat what you got to eat. The vegan cakes, because there's cakes, cookies. That's the next thing I was gonna pizza, dessert. Anything that you like to eat, there's a way to make it delicious and plant-based. It might take a little bit of trial and error, but there's a way to do it. Especially desserts. There's no dessert that you can't fool someone with, a plant-based cake or dessert. You give someone that and they'll never complain. They're never going to be like, oh, is this vegan? It's so easy. It's so easy to fool people. So anyways, I hope this has been helpful. A little bit of insight into my experience. I know it can be daunting to think about, shifting towards more plant-based foods, and, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, but, there's an incredible opportunity to have a positive impact on the environment. And so the more we can normalize plant-based foods, this is something I'm working on. I do a lot of workshops in schools and working with businesses to try to show them how to, take advantage of this opportunity, because, if you're a business that's, serving all these meals every day, or schools, institutions, the default choices these days are the meat-based options, right? We go to restaurants, what's the first thing we see? All the meat options, and then if there's a vegan option, it's hidden in the back somewhere, or you have to ask the waiter or whatever. So the more we can shift things to make the plant-based choices the default choices, the easy choices, that's really, I have a very hard time thinking of something else we could do that would have such a positive impact, right? It's hard to save up and buy an electric vehicle and do all these things. It's not to say that energy isn't important, but food is so underrated, and plant-based eating as part of that food solution is incredibly underrated. So I hope that, this has maybe helped open your eyes. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I know there's probably a gazillion great website information on recipes and others. Do you have a favorite website or recipe?
I'm really bad with, I eat so simply. In reality, if you look at what I eat in my kitchen, I'm super, super easy. I don't do a lot of fancy recipes, but when I do, I really I look up, I honestly just use Google, and I just search for whatever I want, and I'll check out a few different recipes.
Because I do a majority of the cooking, it was kind of okay, if you want something else, if you're willing to make it, go right ahead. And I was doing such a good job cooking more plant-based foods that 2 years ago, everybody in the house made the shift. So.
And now they prefer it?
Yeah, so my 15-year-old has been doing it for a couple of years. My 5-year-old is he does a little bit of meat and chicken, but a majority of his meals are plant-based as well.
My family, when I first went vegan, it was like there were all these arguments taking place at the dinner table, and you know, not everybody was on board. But now you flash forward, it's like 13 years later now, and like all of my immediate family, they're predominantly plant-based, if not vegan, and they've, you know, it's the kind of thing where there's a lot of resistance. Like some of you might be here thinking like, I don't know, but like really, if you think about it and you look at the evidence, like over time, just you know, it really makes a ton of sense. And when I talk, like first when I went vegan, I wanted to tell everybody I met, like I had failed if I didn't make them vegan by the end of the conversation. But now I realize like it takes time. Like the information has to sit in. Like you all need to kind of go and, you know, if I said something and you don't believe me, like go look it up. Like, you know, people, you gotta give time for it to sink in. But and especially trying things, like just making it available, like doing like we're gonna talk about now, I think, and I'll pass it back over to you. Usually what I encourage is for people to think about like, what could you eat for a day? Like what would be a breakfast, lunch, and dinner that would be entirely plant-based just for the exercise, right? And then I know we're gonna look at like, you know, meal planning and stuff like that. So I'll hand it back over to you, but I'm around if there's any questions or anything. And thank you all so much for listening. Thanks.
A lot of you are actually here today because you saw maybe some information about our new Caledon Cares Enviro Challenge. I'm gonna invite John up to the front here to talk about it, but we've got some actions based on today's conversation.
The big things that we were talking about, of course, are the food that we consume and how much food we waste. So thinking of that, we have our first challenge that we're putting out to you guys. This is a whole year-long thing that Eco Caledon has. It's called the Caledon Cares Enviro Challenge. And each set of challenges, starting with food, gives you actions you can do to take, and when you do them, you can let us know, and you have a chance to win prizes, recognition, that kind of stuff. And on here, it has actions you can take. So when you get this, take a look. Turn your dinner into lunch. So that's the first action you could do. So in other words, if you have leftovers, use them for lunch. And we all have that, but quite often we leave them in the back of the fridge. So that's one. You can pick from any of these or all of them if you want to, right? The next one is dedicate a leftovers night. Lou and Jason talked about that, where you just throw everything together and change it up and add things to it. So that's a great opportunity. And then the third one is think ingredients, not leftovers. So start to think about what ingredients you have in the house to make something, rather than have to go out and get more ingredients. And then at the bottom, there's a fourth one, in fact, which is Meatless Mondays, which you can take at. So these are all the actions when you've had a chance to try them. What you can do is, as I said, go to the QR code and enter them. And on our website, there's going to be a link as well, so you can go in there and participate. So take the challenge.